So I see we have more and more people joining this webinar. So I think I'll start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have people joining from 6 a.m. In Canada and also from 10 p.m. from Sulawesi in Indonesia. Thank you very much for joining us all. My name is Leonie Aurora. I'm the Landscapes and Partnerships Lead for the Tropical Forest Alliance. We organize this Jurisdictional Action Network webinars, and this one, the collective action to drive change, putting the jurisdictional approach to work. It's organized with the collaboration with ISEAL, WWF, and Proforest. We have 1 hour together, and this is really a webinar to highlight how the jurisdictional approach can work and what the roles of different stakeholders. We have a great panelist joining us today. We have Veronique Bovee from Proforest, who will give us a quick context setting on where we are with landscape and jurisdictional approaches. And we have representatives from the government, from private sector, and also from civil society. We have Nelson Pomalingo, the district head of Gorontalo from Indonesia, to represent local government. Natasha Schwarzbach from PepsiCo, who is also the co-lead of the landscape working group in the CGR Force Positive Coalition of Action. And we have Gabriela Savian from IPAM in Brazil, who will represent the civil society. We have also Akiva Fishman from WWF US to talk more about the theory of change on how jurisdictional approaches work itself. And we are joined also by Patrick Mallet from ISEAL, who will really help us with the main session and will moderate and guide us together. So without further ado, we have just to highlight that we have interpretation in Indonesian and Portuguese. Please go to the to your Zoom link with the interpretation icon. And if you have any trouble whatsoever, problems whatsoever, please put it on chats and or email Jennifer Kozer from at PFA. So I will hand over directly to Veronique Bovee to give us the context on where landscape and jurisdictional approaches are. Veronique, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Leonie. Hello all. Yes, thanks. I've been asked to quickly talk about general trends and where that we see with regards to landscape engagement and jurisdictional approaches. And I basically wanted to sort of share two main trends with you. The first one being that what we typically see, and this is very much from the perspective of companies and the private sector, that in terms of meeting their sustainability commitments, there is sort of a moving away from just action within supply chains towards engaging in landscape and jurisdictional approaches. So typically, commitments, sustainability commitments were being addressed by working with sort of volumes that companies are sourcing from, as well as working with the suppliers. But there's a general recognition that there is also a responsibility beyond the supply chain and sort of in the landscape and in the areas where the companies are sourcing from, as well as working with the sectors, across sectors. And this is just in terms of that, this is just a realization and responsibility to also work in areas and beyond supply chains. It's also the realization that meeting these commitments cannot be done alone, and that collaboration is needed to address systemic issues. For example, if we are thinking about farmers that are in the sort of upstream and supply chain, there's issues with land titles which need to be solved in collaboration with government and cannot just be solved by working on with suppliers only. So this is a typical trend that we see from companies, that is the theory of change that is also being adopted, for example, by platforms that the CGF Forest Positive Coalition that we will hear. Natasha will talk about that later as well, but also organizations like WWF are, seeing this more as a theory of change to really look at sort of areas beyond the supply chain and work in those. So what this has seen is that this realization and trend to work beyond supply chains has also resulted in an increase in engagement in jurisdictional approaches, and sort of the most, to our knowledge, comprehensive platform that keeps track on numbers is where we can see in, for example, the Earth Innovation, they have a platform on jurisdictional approaches, and there's now 50 jurisdictional approaches across the globe that they list and that they are tracking in their database. So yeah, definitely an increase lately in engagement in landscape approaches. So the other trend that I wanted to talk about and share is that there is sort of initially landscape programs, jurisdictional approaches were often started from a conservation point of view or restoration point of view, sort of more the environmental based focus, so structured around ecosystems at the beginning. Then we saw sort of through REDD+ also a focus on, you know, addressing sort of deforestation, forest conservation. But I think a trend in the last couple of years has been that there is first sort of an engagement and interaction with commodity supply chains. So we see landscape programs also being started by companies who, as I just mentioned, have realized and want to work in areas that they are sourcing from, so feel that responsibility. So there is a trend of integrating commodity supply chains and conservation. And the second thing that we see is that in all of this, there is also a focus and an increased integration of people positive. So the focus was initially on conservation, to start landscape programs on that. And there were, of course, links to sort of livelihoods and linked to sort of sourcing, but we see that now I think a trend is coming up that there's now also landscape programs started just for the purpose of addressing, for example, human rights related issues, and also that these issues are really sort of embedded from the outset, and that thinking about how to build in safeguards to protect and respect the human rights is sort of started from the beginning. And then finally, again, looping back, I mean, I was mentioning REDD+, but now we see, of course, that with sort of the recent announcement at the COP, we see a linkage back that some of these landscape programs, again, by commodity supply chains that were set up to address, for example, deforestation, forest conservation, are now being linked to sort of more climate commitments, nature positive. There's other initiatives like OP2B, the scope 3 emissions, etc. So again, that this is now looked at more holistically, and that these are all looked at and will become more and more important to think about how can we relate these, and this will come up in sort of claims that will be made as well on terms of deforestation and then climate. And I think these were the two main trends I wanted to share, Leonie, with regards to landscapes and jurisdictional approaches.
Thank you very much, Veronique, for that. It's really great, very useful for our discussion moving forward. I'm going to hand over to Patrick now to introduce the session and moderate us.
Great, thank you so much, Leonie, and thanks everyone. Great to have you all here. And as Leonie said, such a good lineup of folks to talk about really how this is working out in practice. So it was great to have Veronique give that kind of context and be able to see now from our individual speakers really why they're engaging with jurisdictional initiatives and what they hope to gain from it. And we've got very short presentations from our three speakers. So I'm going to ask Nelson Pomalingo first to just give a brief context for the work that they're doing in Gorontalo.
Ya, terima kasih. Selamat pagi, sore, malam ya kita semua di seluruh tempat kita melaksanakan webinar. Yang pertama saya menyampaikan terima kasih kesempatan ini. Saya menyampaikan bagaimana pendekatan yurisdiksi di Gorontalo. Kita memulai dengan momen kami melakukan moratorium terhadap sawit dan kita terus mendorong komoditi lokal kita yaitu kelapa. Kenapa kelapa memang di Indonesia itu kurang lebih 3,7 juta hektar dan terbesar di dunia. Kemudian pemerintah daerah dalam rangka melaksanakan komitmen untuk perubahan iklim ini, kita memasukkan melalui RPJMD kita, Rencana Pembangunan Jangka Menengah Daerah. Kita sudah punya pokja terhadap perubahan iklim sekaligus anggaran 10% komitmen kita, baik itu di dana pemerintah daerah, kabupaten maupun dana desa. Karena di Indonesia anggaran pemerintah itu ada dana pusat, dana provinsi, kemudian dana kabupaten, dan terakhir dana desa. Nah, dalam rangka melaksanakan ini kita juga mendorong investasi. Investasi di sini adalah kerjasama dengan masyarakat sipil terkait dengan green climate fund. Saya kira ini kita sudah lakukan melalui budgeting yang ada di kita. Kita terus mendorong ini kerjasama dengan mitra-mitra kita di tingkat nasional maupun tingkat internasional. Kemudian yang berikut juga, kami mendorong monitoring evaluasi yang dilakukan oleh masyarakat sipil maupun dengan kerjasama dengan perguruan tinggi. Di situ kita mengeluarkan protokol ISEAL, dan ini adalah sesuatu yang menjadi pedoman bagi kita sekalian di dalam melaksanakan kendali perubahan iklim yang ada di Gorontalo. Saya kira ini saja yang saya sampaikan, dan mudah-mudahan dengan kolaborasi yang kita lakukan malam ini, kita akan memberikan ruang untuk mengembangkan daerah kita di Gorontalo. Ya, terima kasih. Selamat malam.
Thank you so much, Nelson. And we will have an opportunity later in the session to get into a little bit more detail about how that program is working, and really excited to learn more about that. I'd like to pass it to Natasha Schwarzbach, who is both the Director of Global Procurement and Sustainability at PepsiCo, but also one of the co-chairs of the CGF Forest Positive Coalition of Action working group. So Natasha, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Patrick. And hi, everyone. Happy Monday. I hope you've had a great start to the week. And I'm going to share with you the view from the Consumer Goods Forum Forest Positive Coalition of Action Landscapes Working Group. So who is the CGF, the Forest Positive Coalition of Action? We are 20 of the world's leading consumer goods manufacturers and retailers. And we've come together to realise that actually we are much stronger working together and collaboratively in partnerships. And as a co-lead of the Landscape Working Group with Tesco, you know, we really looked at how we can broaden, as Veronique says, our responsibility with regards to sustainable supply chains. There has been, I wouldn't like to say a seismic shift, but definitely, you know, a strong pivot to work beyond our own supply chains. So we're no longer, we are still working within our own supply chains, but we realise we need to actually coordinate those efforts and be integrated and work beyond them. And that's because the issues are systemic. And so to address those systemic issues, we do need to look at much more of an integrated multi-stakeholder land use program. Thanks, Veronique. Thank you, Leonie. So our ambition. So if you tuned in at COP26 Nature Day, the first time there has been a Nature Day at a COP, you will have seen that we have made the announcement that the Forest Positive Coalition of Action will transform production landscapes into forest positive landscapes in areas equivalent to the coalition's combined production-based footprint by 2030. You know, this is a very important moment in our time whereby, you know, our companies within the Forest Positive Coalition are, you know, taking and leading our way forward. And we want other companies and other stakeholders to really join us in our efforts so that we can really drive that collective action around climate, nature, and people, and move to a positive place. Thanks, Leonie. So to be able to do that, we realised that actually, you know, for many of us, we're at very various levels of knowledge and understanding about what a landscape or jurisdictional approach is. And so we want to be able to bring others with us. So we start to create a level playing field. We spent the past year or so really ensuring that we have a good set of principles in which to follow with regards to a landscape initiative, and also what are some of those landscape initiatives that as consumer goods companies we can invest in and really learn from it. So our first phase is really learning through action, and to be able to do that we analysed a number of different landscape initiatives, and we have now 22 initiatives in palm oil, paper pulp and packaging, soy and beef. And these initiatives, each of them will be invested in by the end of this year. So, you know, if you think about it, we have 20 of the world's leading consumer goods companies and manufacturers. In 2021, each of those companies will be investing into a landscape to really learn through action. And we have 22 landscape initiatives to invest in. So, you know, we are really very much moving forward with this approach to address systemic issues within our own supply chain and beyond. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks so much, Natasha. There's so much to dive into here. I'm glad that we have the opportunity for a discussion, but as you say, it is just it's that learning phase, and I think there's going to be a lot of good learning that comes out of this over the next years, and hopefully is able to bring a lot of companies beyond the core groups together on this journey. So we have a third speaker, Gabriela Savian from IPAM, and I'm glad that you can be here. I'm hoping that you're able to speak just a little bit from civil society perspective, and I understand that you're just going to speak without slides. Is that correct?
I will share my slides here. I have a few slides, but I will pass quickly for them. I will have help in translation. So I will pass to Portuguese. Olá, bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite a todos. Eu sou Gabriela Savian, sou diretora adjunta de políticas públicas do Instituto de Pesquisa Ambiental da Amazônia. Eu não estou conseguindo aqui passar rapidinho pela apresentação de todos os slides. Todos estão vendo, né? Então, o IPAM é um instituto de pesquisa que trabalha na Amazônia há 25 anos com a missão de estabelecer modelos de desenvolvimento sustentável para a Amazônia. Nós estamos hoje atuando com os 9 estados da Amazônia Legal, apoiando em diferentes níveis a atuação tanto de ciência, desenvolvimento territorial e políticas públicas, em trabalhos com escritórios ao longo da Amazônia, em diferentes estados, mas também num trabalho regional, atuando no apoio ao consórcio da Amazônia Legal, nessa atuação estratégica para o desenvolvimento, para o alcance do desenvolvimento de baixas emissões na Amazônia. Nós temos uma abordagem em que começamos do desenvolvimento da geração de ciência e de informações estratégicas, onde, a partir delas, testamos essa ciência com base em pilotos, em ações de desenvolvimento territorial, em atividades em nível territorial e jurisdicional, e alcançando escala influenciando e gerando informações para as políticas públicas e para a tomada de decisão privada também para o investimento na Amazônia Legal. Trabalhamos através do fortalecimento da agricultura familiar enquanto a estratégia de desenvolvimento de várias atividades de fortalecimento de cadeias produtivas, de governança territorial, de capacitação, de formação de capacidades para o fortalecimento da agricultura familiar, a atuação com as áreas protegidas, também no fortalecimento de governança, geração de informação estratégica, para que as áreas, tanto as áreas protegidas como aquelas que estão aguardando pela destinação, sejam áreas a serem protegidas. Então, enquanto sociedade civil, apoiando as políticas públicas para a proteção de grandes áreas de floresta. Estratégias também de agricultura de baixo carbono, e aí temos uma das iniciativas muito importantes, que é o Conserve, que busca valorizar os ativos ambientais em propriedades privadas, valorizar a floresta a partir da compensação dessa conservação, para que a essas áreas, em torno de 11 milhões de hectares de florestas na Amazônia, possam ser conservadas, que esses 11 milhões seriam áreas que legalmente poderiam ser abertas, e através dessa iniciativa a gente busca a valorização desses ativos ambientais. Aqui, então, via o Conserve na proteção das florestas privadas, e no alcance de escala, através das políticas públicas, atuando junto com os estados em um instrumento estratégico, e que nós temos trabalhado num arranjo público-privado, através dos sistemas jurisdicionais de RED+, de RED+, para estabelecer políticas que alcancem a valorização dos ativos ambientais, pagamento por serviços ambientais, repartição de benefícios, garantindo as salvaguardas socioambientais para o desenvolvimento de baixas emissões. As estratégias dos estados para o desenvolvimento de baixas emissões, e aqui citando as estratégias do Mato Grosso e do Pará, tanto a PCI como a Amazônia agora, como políticas e planejamento estratégico para que as ações das políticas públicas ancoradas e complementares às ações das políticas privadas alcancem a regularização ambiental, o licenciamento ambiental, regularização fundiária e ordenamento territorial, a valorização própria dos ativos ambientais e o fomento à produção sustentável. E entendendo que essas estratégias estaduais, elas estejam ancoradas numa estratégia regional, que aí eu trago aqui o Consórcio da Amazônia Legal como um locus muito importante, estratégico para a Amazônia, para a redução de desmatamento, e aí apoiando, enquanto sociedade civil, apoiando o consórcio no estabelecimento do seu plano de recuperação verde, que foi lançado anteriormente, mas apresentado na COP26, onde traz aí 2 principais eixos para o desenvolvimento de baixas emissões, no freio ao desmatamento, valorização dos ativos ambientais e fortalecimento das cadeias produtivas. Então, essas estratégias sendo âncoras à nossa atuação enquanto sociedade civil no suporte através de informação estratégica, de fortalecimento de governança territorial, estabelecer os ambientes favoráveis para que as políticas públicas e privadas sejam estabelecidas na Amazônia. Fico aí aberta depois para a gente conversar um pouquinho mais. Obrigada.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gabriela. And again, lots to dive into. I think critical to see the role that civil society plays in bringing together different stakeholders and also holding governments to account. I'm going to pass directly over to my colleague, Akiva Fishman, who's the manager for forests at WWF. And he's going to speak to something that we've worked painstakingly together on with our colleagues over the last year, the theory of change for these jurisdictional approaches. And I'm excited for everyone to finally be able to see some of this work. Akiva.
Thanks, Patrick. It's fascinating to listen to the speakers that we just heard from, who were carefully selected to reflect positions from government, private sector, and civil society. And I think even just the short snippets we heard really should convey a sense for how jurisdictional initiatives comprise a web of interconnected motivations and actions by a range of different stakeholders. And all these stakeholders are united by a common goal, which is to advance scaled sustainability, strengthen livelihoods, and respect for human rights across the production landscape. But it can be daunting for any one actor, whether they're a government entity, a company, a producer, an indigenous or local community, or a civil society organization. It can be daunting to think about how their own efforts can move the needle towards such a massive goal, change at a landscape level. So we and our partners on this webinar saw an opportunity to lend some clarity and to help guide the thinking of those who are considering engagement in jurisdictional initiatives in order to maximize the impact of their actions. So WWF collaborated with ISEAL, Proforest, and TFA to create an interactive theory of change for jurisdictional approaches that elucidates the role of each stakeholder type and how their contributions intersect with and enable the contributions of other stakeholders to drive towards that end goal of a sustainable production landscape. This theory of change diagram lives on the JA Resource Hub website that TFA manages, and I'll just ask one of the other webinar hosts to please post that link in the chat. And Leonie, if you go to the next slide, please. So the theory of change diagram consists of a set of parallel and interlinked pathways for each type of stakeholder that plays an integral role in the success of a jurisdictional initiative. And if I had more than 5 minutes, I would walk through this diagram in more detail. But in the time that I have, I want to point out two main things. The first is that the pathway for each stakeholder is made up of a series of steps which depict the sequence of actions that stakeholder would take from the early to the later phases of a jurisdictional initiative's implementation. And the second thing I'll point out is that the actions at each step are dependent for their success on actions reflected in the pathways of other stakeholders. And in turn, they enable the success of subsequent actions taken by others. Next slide, please. So one of the nice characteristics of this diagram is that it's interactive. So when you view it on the web page, you can click on a single stakeholder's pathway to highlight the series of steps they take and the dependencies between their steps and those of other stakeholders. So for instance, if you were clicking on the sourcing company's pathway, which is what has been done in this slide, you'd quickly notice the importance in the early stages of setting up the jurisdictional process through a multi-stakeholder platform, which helps to identify the needs of all stakeholders and enables the subsequent action planning that feeds into all later steps of engagement. Next slide. You can also click on any individual step to call up a box that gives more details about the required action, the other actions it depends on, and its impacts. We built in this functionality so that the diagram would both be quite information rich while also being very easy to use. And last slide, please. So the picture this theory of change paints is that jurisdictional initiatives are inherently complex. Any stakeholder can't move from the top of the diagram to the bottom in pursuit of jurisdictional sustainability without the collaboration of other stakeholders. But there's value in that complexity because it's really the only way to drive impact at scale rather than impact on individual farms or in individual supply chains, which may not drive the larger transformations and land use that we need. So this theory of change tool helps to break that complexity down to its component parts. And its real utility is that it can help any actor looking to engage in a jurisdictional initiative plan their interventions to maximize impact by charting the path in which those interventions are embedded. In other words, this tool helps bring systems thinking into the planning of any actor's jurisdictional engagement. With this tool now in your minds, I'll hand the mic back to Patrick, whose conversation with our panelists is going to highlight how some of these interconnections actually play out.
Thanks so much, Akiva. And honestly, I mean, I think this whole webinar and where the thinking is at this stage is very much, well, landscape and jurisdictional approaches are a nice idea, but let's dig into the details. Let's get a better sense of what it actually means to be implementing these approaches and to see what kinds of relationships there are between different stakeholders in practice. So Nelson, I'm going to come to you first, and I'm very interested just from what you said, do you feel like the role of government is to essentially set the planning and the conditions to encourage investment by others? Or what do you see as the critical roles for government in making sure landscape and jurisdictional approaches are beneficial for your constituency?
Ya, memang benar disampaikan tadi, kami sebagai pemerintah pertama menuangkan di dalam perencanaan kita, yaitu apa yang disebut dengan rencana pembangunan menengah jangka pendek dan jangka menengah. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, kita membuat regulasi yang terkait dengan pemberian kesempatan untuk investasi lestari di Gorontalo. Kemudian yang ketiga, kita membuat kelembagaannya. Ada Pokja perubahan iklim yang ada di Kabupaten Gorontalo. Kemudian yang keempat, kita juga mendorong dari sisi anggaran, menyiapkan anggaran seperti komitmen kami 10% dari APBD kita maupun juga dana desa. Karena seperti saya sampaikan tadi, di Indonesia itu ada dana di pemerintah daerah dan ada di dana di tingkat desa. Kemudian kami juga punya lingkar temu Kabupaten Lestari, kelembagaan yang multi pihak yang merupakan kaukus dari pemerintah daerah. Ada 11 daerah yang berkomitmen untuk melangsungkan ekonomi lestari. Bagaimana lingkungan terjaga, tapi masyarakat juga tetap sejahtera. Nah, lingkar temu Kabupaten Lestari ini ada 5 pilar yang kami terus dorong. Pertama, perencanaan, seperti yang kami sudah lakukan di Gorontalo. Kemudian regulasi, kemudian juga pemantauan dan pelaporan, kemudian aksi bersama yang kami lakukan, baik oleh multi pihak maupun juga antar daerah, pemerintah daerah, kemudian kelembagaan multi pihak yang kami lakukan di tingkat daerah masing-masing. Ini saya kira yang kami lakukan untuk memberi ruang investasi di daerah masing-masing. Ya, makasih.
Great. Thank you so much, Nelson. I want to ask a follow-up question, and it's just your focus on the monitoring and evaluation, particularly is interesting to understand already what type of information you're able to provide to companies that are looking to invest in your region or to other stakeholders to show the progress that's being made. So can you talk a little bit about the types of things that are being monitored?
Ya, informasi yang kami berikan kepada perusahaan yang pertama tentunya potensi wilayah kami di daerah. Kemudian yang kedua perencanaan di dalam daerah itu sendiri. Kemudian yang berikut juga tata ruang. Misalnya kami berikan kepada daerah. Berikut juga regulasi yang mendukung investasi yang ada di kami. Termasuk juga kelembagaan yang kami bentuk. Bahkan juga bagaimana kondisi para petani kita. Saya menarik tadi dari Ibu Gabriela ya, yang menyampaikan pertanian yang berbasis keluarga. Ini juga di Kabupaten Gorontalo kita terus dorong. Sehingga bagi investor itu akan memberikan pemahaman yang baik sehingga mereka tertarik untuk mendorong investasi di daerah. Nah, terakhir kami terus terang saja terus melakukan ada portofolio investasi yang ada di daerah yang menjadi pegangan bagi para investor yang ada yang di daerah kita. Dan inilah merupakan bisa diakses ya melalui profil yuridisi kita yang sudah dikeluarkan oleh pemerintah daerah, bahkan juga melalui tingkat pemerintah nasional.
Great. Thanks, Nelson. And one of the reasons I asked that question, I think it's very important that together we come to a collective understanding of what jurisdictional approaches are able to deliver and how we're going to show progress against them. And as different stakeholders think about that question or those questions, they're coming up with their own models. And so it's very important and promising that LTKL and all the regional governments have come up with clear platform of this is the type of information we can provide, and essentially making the case, making it easy for companies to understand how to invest and what benefits they're going to see. And I want to draw Natasha in now just to get a better sense from you, and also thinking about the Forest Positive Coalition. When you're thinking about a forest positive landscape, is there a clear definition of what that is? How did you come to qualify those 22 landscapes? And is that a set group, or is that just the starting point for broader investment in other landscapes that can move towards that definition of forest positive?
Thanks, Patrick, and that's a really good question. And I'll answer the last question first, shall I? So it's definitely a start. You know, we had I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but maybe 30 or 40 different landscape programs to actually analyse and review and analyse as a group. We set ourselves a very strict guidance to be able to do that. And if you go onto the website, you can see that we have sort of 10 core criteria, if you like, which we together as a landscape working group, drawing on knowledge from external parties, as well as our own knowledge that we've gathered over the years through working through landscape programs, we developed these, you know, sort of 10 core principles, if you like. And we applied those when we did the review of those 22 landscape programs. But what we did is we actually asked implementation partners to submit their landscape programs for us to really understand them and see all the different components of it. And that in itself was very much a key learning experience for even, you know, some of the companies who have been working in landscape initiatives for, you know, for a number of years. So, you know, it's certainly not, you know, these are the golden 22. It's like, this is where we're starting from, and we need to build on that so that we can further align all of our efforts and, you know, really move towards that forest positive. And for us, that forest positive is around nature, climate, and people, and they have various components within them. We are developing our key performance indicators at the moment, and we're looking to announce those in 2022.
Great. I think what's really exciting about the work of the Forest Positive Coalition is to be able to align companies around these definitions and expectations. Because one of the key challenges, I think, is first of all, companies needing to have a clear justification for why is it important to invest beyond our supply chains. But then also, in doing that, what does that practically mean? And I know you spoke a little bit about this, but can you just talk a little bit, even from PepsiCo's perspective, about maybe some of the justifications for why this is important as a part of your broader sustainability strategy as a company?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, why it's important for us is because when we look at our PepsiCo positive agenda, we're looking at a sustainable food system. And, you know, to get to that point, we needed to go beyond our own supply chain, because the issues that we're looking to address and work with stakeholders to find the appropriate solutions for those landscapes is that, you know, those issues are systemic. So it's not just within our own supply chain. It's happening on the farm that's, you know, across the paddock or the field or the plantation, wherever you're from, whatever terminology you use. And so what we want to be able to do is, you know, not just transform our own supply chain, but ensure that there's economic growth and development in those markets in which we're sourcing from. And that also feeds into, you know, how do we ensure that, you know, we're looking at climate adaptation processes and, you know, water management and all of those key components that ensures that, you know, our business has a sustainable food system in place, but also so does everyone else. Because, you know, it's about ensuring, you know, we're looking after the planet and people.
Yeah. And I think we can come back to that. I'm interested first, though, to go to Gabriella just to understand better, I mean, very interesting presentation, Gabriela, particularly the range of responsibilities almost that civil society has in helping to bring these initiatives together and really catalyze action on the ground. So you talked both about the importance of research, but then public policy as a key driver. Can you actually speak to what you see as some of the key elements that are necessary for an effective landscape and jurisdictional approach? So is the role of government, for example, and the interest of government in engaging, is that critically important to the success of an initiative, or are there other factors that also need to be in place?
Obrigada, Patrick, pela sua pergunta. Acho que é uma pergunta bastante ampla que nos permite abordar um pouquinho melhor. A nossa abordagem enquanto Instituto de Pesquisa é olhar para os diferentes componentes do território, da jurisdição, e acho que essa estratégia jurisdicional precisa ter um olhar amplo e estratégico, então com planejamento, tanto das políticas como das ações, a implementação das ações, de forma a convergir para resultados e impactos que busquem a redução do desmatamento, a valorização, o fortalecimento das cadeias, o aumento da produção sustentável nessas jurisdições, com participação social, com garantia das salvaguardas socioambientais, da redução dos riscos ambientais e sociais que possam acontecer nesse território. Acredito que ações estratégicas para a gente alcançar o desenvolvimento de baixas emissões, a redução do desmatamento, que hoje a gente tem visto, né, o quanto o enfraquecimento das políticas públicas resultaram nesse aumento significativo de desmatamento na Amazônia, né? Hoje, semana passada, nós tivemos o resultado do desmatamento do último ano aqui na Amazônia, né? E demonstrou que a gente voltou lá para 2006, antes do estabelecimento das estratégias e das políticas robustas de redução de desmatamento. Então, nós sabemos como alcançar essa redução de desmatamento e o aumento da produção. Já vimos isso, o exemplo é o Mato Grosso, já vimos isso no estado onde reduziu significativamente o desmatamento e aumentou consideravelmente a produção. Para isso, num olhar jurisdicional, entendo que é necessário ter políticas públicas consistentes, e aí volto a mencionar regularização ambiental, ordenamento territorial, regularização fundiária, comando e controle para redução do desmatamento, para punir aqueles que estão grilando terra, e hoje a gente tem uma porcentagem muito grande do desmatamento na Amazônia acontecendo em áreas públicas que não estão destinadas para os seus devidos usos, como conservação ou manejo sustentável, né? E também a valorização dos ativos ambientais, trabalhar instrumentos econômicos que apoiem a conservação da floresta em pé, tanto nas áreas públicas como nas áreas privadas. O fortalecimento da produção sustentável através da orientação dos investimentos tanto público como privados, com base nessas informações estratégicas, pesquisa e inovação para cadeias da bioeconomia, que hoje estão sendo muito trabalhadas, né? O Pará lançou lá na COP, a gente apoiou a estratégia de bioeconomia do Pará, justamente nesse sentido de como trabalhar estrategicamente e implementar as ações no território. E, por último, para citar, o fortalecimento da governança territorial e a formação de capacidades. Acho que esses são os principais componentes para que a gente alcance a implementação de ações consistentes na abordagem jurisdicional ou de paisagem.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. I think what I'm hearing from all the speakers, but especially from you, is how important it is to look at all the different pieces that need to be in place in order to drive this more systemic change. And it's important, I think, that stakeholders come together. You mentioned at the end the importance of supporting almost the infrastructure, the places where stakeholders can come together and talk about the commitments and the actions and how they're going to monitor. Do you see that there's a role for civil society in helping to coordinate stakeholders and bringing them together? Or is that primarily a governmental role?
Eu acredito que não é somente um papel da política pública, dos governos, né? E nós temos, enquanto sociedade civil, temos apoiado a estruturação, a elaboração de arranjos público-privados que possam ser trabalhados em conjunto para o alcance dos resultados e impactos positivos para a Amazônia. Então, acredito que essas estratégias tanto no nível regional da Amazônia Legal, no nível de estados subnacional, ou no nível de territórios, de paisagens, um conjunto de municípios, um recorte político, regional, geográfico de uma jurisdição, ela deve olhar para esses arranjos público-privados. E nós, enquanto sociedade civil, trabalhamos para isso, para apoiar, fortalecer as governanças territoriais para a implementação dessas ações, tanto no conjunto, né, público-privado, e apoiando com informação estratégica, com geração de informação estratégica, com monitoramento, com fortalecimento e formação de capacidades, que acho que esse é um componente muito importante também para que a gente alcance a sustentabilidade das ações.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm sorry that we don't have a lot more time to discuss, because I think we're just touching the surface. I feel like if I could ask you each one question, maybe each of you in turn, thinking about the topic and about how important it is to find ways for stakeholders to work together to try to address some of these very fundamental challenges. Maybe for each of you, and Nelson, I'll ask you first, what is one thing that you would most like to see be in place in order for these jurisdictional approaches to be successful? So what is the one thing that's missing or could be strengthened? Nelson?
Ya, yang pertama tentunya kolaborasi semua pihak, dan itu kami antar pemerintah daerah punya lingkar temu Kabupaten Lestari. Sambil juga di antara kami dengan NGO dengan multi pihak duduk bersama. Kemudian yang kedua, kami juga ingin mendorong profil investasi kami. Karena itu melalui Ibu Natasha ini, saya kira kami punya program untuk pengembangan kelapa yang perkebunan untuk jangka panjang. Kenapa? Karena perkebunan ini dari sisi ekonomi baik dan juga dari sisi ekologi juga baik. Kemudian yang ketiga, kami di setiap tahun ada festival Kabupaten Lestari. Di sana obrolan-obrolan Lestari kami lakukan, baik untuk generasi muda maupun juga bagi investor yang ada, khususnya para pengusaha kita. Saya juga ingin sampaikan, ini menjadi pengalaman di Gorontalo, yaitu kami mendorong taman hutan rakyat. Saya kira taman hutan rakyat ini tadinya adalah pertanian, justru kami robah lagi menjadi menjadi hutan. Kenapa? Karena ini menjadi penyangga hutan lindung yang ada di Gorontalo. Tetapi itu dikelola oleh masyarakat dan oleh pemerintah daerah. Ini saya kira yang sebagai informasi tambahan, dan sekali lagi kami atas nama pemerintah lokal Gorontalo yang berada di Sulawesi, yang mewakili, mudah-mudahan mewakili pemerintah daerah, menyampaikan terima kasih atas obrolan webinar hari ini. Terima kasih.
Thank you, very much a pleasure. And we'll see in just a moment the video highlighting the festival. So I'm very excited about that. Natasha, some quick final thought from you.
Patrick, I've never been that quick, but I'll try my best. So final thoughts are really, Forest Positive is about conservation, restoration, and inclusion. So if we're really going to make a difference, we need to ensure that we have all actors of the supply chain, larger companies as well as smaller companies, the inclusion of smallholders, communities, stakeholders, all working together collaboratively and really, let's move forward and align those goals and not let, perfection get in the way of process. So that would be my call.
Yeah, let's get out there and start doing it. That's absolutely right. And Gabriela, final quick word to you.
Acredito que é importante ter as instâncias de tomada de decisão e instrumentos estratégicos que permitam a implementação, de fato, das ações contundentes. E aí, nesse sentido, nós temos trabalhado muito com os sistemas jurisdicionais de RED+, enquanto um olhar de arranjo e arranjo institucional público-privado que possa trazer essas ações e alcançar os resultados contundentes. E nisso que a gente acredita e tem colocado todos os nossos esforços e para essa implementação, e acredito que possa ser uma das formas de alcançarmos o desenvolvimento de baixas emissões. Mas não existe, Perfect. Talvez não exista uma bala de prata, um jeito certo, né? É um arranjo que olhe para a jurisdição como um todo. Obrigada.
Yeah, and very important point to end on. This is not a silver bullet. This is, in fact, a difficult, challenging process, but one that we've seen is worthwhile and one where we really are able to get at some of these more systemic, challenging issues and make some durable and enduring change. I'm going to pass it back to Leonie now just for some final announcements about some of the different initiatives, including the one from Gorontalo that hopefully provide opportunities for you to engage further in these discussions. Leonie?
Thanks a lot, Patrick, and thanks a lot for such a great moderation. I know we can always count on you for great moderation. Thank you, everyone. We will have we want to encourage everyone to engage further in landscape and jurisdictional approaches. We have really a great set of speakers here, but also there are ways in the near future to engage directly with them. And the first one is we have like 3 quick announcements of the next events. The first one is from Festival Kabupaten Lestari. I will just play the video and maybe Pak Nelson can follow up with just quick invitation. I will play the video now.
Ya, terima kasih Putri ya. Ya, makasih. Jadi kita melalui Lingkar Temu Kabupaten Lestari itu setiap tahun melaksanakan Festival Kabupaten Lestari, menjadi ajang media untuk berkomunikasi baik kita antar pemerintah daerah maupun juga dengan multi pihak. Kebetulan di Gorontalo untuk keempat kalinya kita melaksanakan ini dan tuan rumahnya Kabupaten Gorontalo dan Pomalingo di Provinsi Gorontalo. Besok kita akan melakukan obrolan lestari dan mudah-mudahan dari semua yang hadir melalui webinar ini bisa ikut serta. Karena itu kami mengundang secara resmi pada malam hari ini sehingga bisa melihat berobrolan secara langsung dengan multi pihak yang kami lakukan pada besok hari. Terima kasih atas webinar ini sekali lagi dan promosi Lingkar Temu Kabupaten Lestari khususnya Festival Kabupaten Lestari yang ada di Kabupaten Gorontalo, Sulawesi, Indonesia. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Pak Nelson. I wish I could be there directly in Indonesia, but definitely we will join online. Maybe next year, Pak, I can go to Indonesia. So the next one is from ISEAL. Sorry. So Patrick, do you want to give a...
Yes. Thanks, Leonie. So, in the background of all this work, there's been a a lot of effort by a range of organizations to try to work together to understand how to be most effective. So in this instance, through collaboration with all of my colleagues here with Proforest and TFA, WWF and others, we've been looking at what are the types of things that if a company is investing or engaging directly in landscape and jurisdictional approaches, what are the types of things that are going to be important for the eventual success to maximize the impact of your engagement? And in that, we've come up with this set of draft guiding practices, and it's currently under consultation. You can see the link at the bottom, and it'll also be in the chat on the right-hand side. And really, this is an opportunity for us to collectively think about, in practice, what does it look like for companies to engage? And also to address some of the challenging questions that arise when looking at the nature of that engagement. So what types and to what extent is investment needed? How can we maximize the impact of that by collaborating or working collectively? And importantly, how can companies then communicate credibly and meaningfully about their investments and the impacts that those investments are having? So the consultation is open until the 10th of December, and we encourage you to at least have a look at these guiding practices. And if you're interested to participate, that would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. And that's a nice segue to our next announcement from CDP, our colleague Norma.
Yes, well, thank you, Leonie, and a special thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. Hello, everyone. As you know, for CDP, landscapes and jurisdictional approaches are one of the main elements for our forest and sustainable land use strategy. And as a global platform, we want to make sure that the integration of new questions on landscapes and jurisdictional approaches are aligned with all the relevant assessment frameworks, standards, and discussions that are happening about credible and robust landscapes and jurisdictional approaches. Therefore, we are doing an intense external revision process. And currently we have a survey for key partners and experts on the States and Regions questionnaire, concluding on December 1st. We also concluded the consultation with companies on the new metrics in October 19th. Thank you very much for all of the companies that provided us with your feedback and inputs. We really take very seriously all of the inputs provided. And this is a very important contribution for the development of the guidance and scoring methodology for 2022. Additionally, well, check out your mailboxes and CDP social media at the end of this month. We are launching a global report on the findings for 2020 and 2021 companies engaged on landscapes and jurisdictional approaches. I'm sure this will be of everyone's interest. And well, as you know, and this webinar also reflects that, Indonesia and Brazil are one of the top countries on landscape and jurisdictional implementation. And it is not only worth, but necessary to take a look at their best practices. So we have a policy brief on the Indonesia case on landscape and jurisdictional approaches, also to be launched at the end of this year. And we're working on a specific case study from the case of Mato Grosso and PCI. This will be launched together with ISEAL. And well, we are having the ears very open today because we want to continue the discussion of this webinar in January 26. So stay tuned, and we are formally going to send you the invitation ASAP to continue the discussions and learning process. More trainings are happening also in February. And any questions or recommendations for the following webinar, or if you just want to get a closer view on CDP's work on landscape and jurisdictional approaches, I'll put my email in the chat so we can stay in contact. And thank you so much. Back to you, Leonie.
Great. Thanks a lot, Norma. And I just want to say another big thanks to all the speakers, Veronique, Pat Nelson, Natasha, Gabriela, Akiva, and Patrick, and Norma as well for joining us. And thank you for everyone. We are hosting various resources in the JA Resource Hub. And just the Jurisdictional Action Network really is to serve the community that wants to promote landscape and jurisdictional approaches. So if you have any idea on what to share or what to discuss, please send an email to us. Please connect to us. And yeah, and just want to say thank you again, and have a great day. Have a nice rest in the evening, or wherever you are. And we'll see you in the next Jan webinar. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Di sana ya?
Iya.